Hey guys, what's up? It's Caleb here, welcoming you back to another video. Over the 4 years or so that I've been speedrunning Final Fantasy VII, there's been a lot of discoveries, new skips, new glitches that will help save time in the speedrun itself. Jesse skip, bar skip, Midgar skip, guard skip, and now recently, a new trick has been found called Cosmo Canyon skip. This was a skip that was known about, but only able to be done in a TAS, which is tool-assisted speedrun format, which means that everything lined up perfectly. They could pretty much manipulate the RNG or, have the game do exactly what it wanted to do in exactly ideal conditions, which cannot be replicated in real time. However, recently, due to some heavy work from people in the community, this has been brought to life, and now we can do it in real time. However, quite the earful. Very complex. Also, I just want to throw that out there once again, that over half my viewers of these videos are not subscribed, so I don't know what the fuck is that about. So, hit the subscribe button or your internet goes away permanently. Even if you move away from your current residence, doesn't matter. It'll go away. So if you want the short story, stay tuned for just a minute, but if you want the long story, which is kind of like a novel of information, if you're interested in that sort of thing, stay tuned. But anyway, let's get to the topic of the video, Cosmo Canyon skip. For the short story, for those of you who are interested, you essentially skip Cosmo Canyon. No, I wouldn't do that to you, but seriously, this trick is really complicated. It's a lot of information, and buckle up, because I'm about to talk your ear off about Final Fantasy VII mechanics. So, here goes. Before I get too deep into why Cosmo Canyon skip works, we need to know two things. The first one being, Final Fantasy VII does not like it when you try to do two things at once, which is why bar skip works, which is why Jesse skip works, which is why Cosmo Canyon skip works. Photo skip, even. That's not something I mentioned, but that's another trick that we do in the speedrun. Essentially what you're doing is you're triggering two events that are happening simultaneously, and the game's like, what the fuck, right? And it doesn't really know what to do at that point. And you can bypass like certain flags. For instance, photo skip, Sephiroth tries to stop you. He's like, hey, take a photo. And the other guy's like, hey, you can't go past here. And you're triggering those two events on the exact same time. And the game's like, so none of the flags are really, like, being activated properly. And you can just go right past the Sephiroth and skip. Of course, it's dangerous to do in a casual run because you die. The second being, the world map encounter seeds are generated based on the in-game timer of Final Fantasy VII. If you open up the menu, it'll show the in-game time, and then the camera position. It's quite weird, but it's a really easy way to make seeds. With that knowledge in mind, this can kind of create a puzzle piece that will fit into other puzzle pieces, per se, that I'm going to mention later in the video. So as you can see, the world map in-game time does affect encounters. We're going to leave here at 2:53:15, and we're going to head directly right. And an encounter will happen here every single time as long as we leave the world map at that time. Next, I'm going to leave the world map at a different time, 2:53:17 this time. And again, I'm going to hold right, and it's going to produce a different encounter on a different spot. And once again, I'm going to do the same thing with another time 2 seconds later. And as you can see, the encounter was different, and also happened a bit later. So this kind of gives you a basic rundown of how world map encounters work. However, there is one more thing that I need to tell you. When you introduce different movements, aka different X and Y values, whenever you're moving on the world map. the same principle can be applied to the y-axis. It works in the exact same way, although it will form different encounters because they are different values, the x and y. And again, I'm going to fast forward to 253.19, and it's going to produce a different encounter, resulting in 3 dragons this time. So again, I'm going to load up a 253.13 IGT. IGT is in-game. However, this little movement that I'm going to do is going to affect the battle RNG. As you can see there, it took significantly longer than what you saw before, just because I introduced a y value into the equation. And I'm going to do the exact same thing, except I'm going to introduce more. And right there, a battle happens immediately as I go right. So from here, you might be wondering that you might have to have incredibly specific movement in order to reduce your encounters or go through the world map with no encounters at all. And you're right. You have to have perfect movement for a set in-game time in order to make that work. This route additionally requires a chocobo. The reason for that is because whenever you walk left with it, it's going to try to get into a desert, and if you park the buggy in this correct position, Cloud will get off, and then he will be in this glitched state where he tries to enter the desert, but he cannot because the game prevents him from doing so, but at the same time, the chocobo is doing the exact same thing. However, during this text box, you cannot mash out of it, or Cloud gets out of his glitched state, and you will no longer be able to do the thing I'm about to show you. So, that wasn't enough. I'm going to introduce more information to you. Here you go. So here, I've created a seed for 253.11. This is when I will go into the Corral Desert and then exit, landing on 253 in-game time. And if you saw there, let me rewind that. Remember the X and Y values that I was telling you about? I had to move that 1 pixel up, and then that allowed me to generate this encounter right here. And this only applies for this very in-game time. And I created it for me because this is where I'm going to be on average whenever I get to this run. And the idea of this encounter is that you're going to learn Aqualung. The video didn't, but then you'll have the E skill, and then you'll get your chocobo. So with this in mind, you can gather that you do need chocoboler, and yes, it is 2,000 gil, and you do have to plan accordingly for your money route, based on how the Midgar goes. It's pretty static, and you end up getting out of Midgar at this point with only 2,002 gil if you do the speedrun properly. But, you know, that's 2 more than you need, and you end up getting it anyway. So it's quite tight with the money as far as that goes. And to get this chocobo, obviously you need to farm on the world map in order for it to appear. It doesn't always appear in every world map encounter. It's somewhat likely, and other tracks have different probabilities of it. But needless to say, you are going to have to get a chocobo, and that can be quite tedious. However, with the world map manipulation that I discussed earlier in the video, with the in-game time, we can manipulate a specific encounter that gives us one every single time. And yes, this does create the complications that I figured you would be asking about. What if you move 1 pixel too far up? Well, guess what? You're not going to get that exact encounter because of what I talked about earlier. Instead, you're not even going to get a chocobo at all, and you're going to get this encounter instead. However, this is where it gets extremely complicated and very messy, because not every runner is going to land at this exact in-game time at the same time, as there are runners that are faster than others, and then there are slower runners than others. So they're going to arrive at this specific spot at a different time. So what does that mean? You have to create your own manipulation / encounter seed to get this very encounter that I'm about to show you. This is quite tedious. It's a huge pain in the ass, but it's worth the 11 minutes that this trick saves. Man, is it complicated. Another thing to note is that the in-game timer also runs during the encounter. So you have to set aside a certain amount of time for the encounter to lapse. You know, and there are different times that the encounter can get over with because the Harpy can do different things. He can start with Poison Breath, which costs a lot of time. Then he goes into the attack, then he does the Aqualung. Or he can start with a regular attack and then do Aqualung, which is much faster. However, what I've generally done is set aside about 1 minute and 20 seconds-ish for my Cosmo Canyon skip methods. Other people might do faster, others slower. You just have to figure out what works for you. This is where the whole trial and error really starts to become a mess. So, now that we have all of those things lined up together, all the puzzle pieces, well, not all of them, but kind of on the board, and we're missing maybe one or two. Just a lot of information. Your head probably hurts at this point. I'm about to show you something insane. Here we go. So I will be doing this from a very fresh save, and utilizing the 253.11. I am going to be doing this on 253.12, and that is because PS2 fastest speed, which is the standard to speedrun Final Fantasy VII on, has 1 second loader, or 1 second faster load times than the emulator that I am using. So that's great. You have to test that. So again, 253.12. And don't worry, and you're going to see how much quicker this loads versus the other one that I showed you before. So again, we're going to get into this exact position, and then we're going to go 1 pixel up like before, and then go all the way right. So again, we have kind of gathered the X and Y values. You know, they can affect world map encounters, the in-game time, the camera angle, which doesn't really matter because the camera angle doesn't change at all. And we make sure of that because there is an overhead setting that will make the camera not move at all. And the fact that the Chocobo and Cloud's glitchy state and all these things kind of add up, and then, you know, if you introduce different pixels into your movement, then that creates a different encounter seed and all this information that you probably don't really care to know, but you're watching this because you're probably bored or something. I don't know. Who knows? But I appreciate you taking the time to watch the video, of course. So here we go. Remember when I said I wait a certain amount of time? Well, here we go. I start the timer whenever I leave the desert. And here, I believe I get out at 1:23 or 1:21. Okay. So this is the trial and error. On emulator, what you have to do is choose a route, and you have to create it yourself. And as you see here, I'm going to be moving in a very, very, very specific fashion. And this is all pixel perfect. Every one of these stops. And the reason being that if I go too far or, you know, don't go far enough, it'll create a bad world map encounter seed for me. And I won't be able to utilize as much movement as I need to get out of these pixels. So I have to load up a state, you know, see how far I can go, and then load it up again, see, you know, different pixels I can work with, and it's just a giant mess. But as you can see here, I haven't gotten an encounter one time, because I'm following a very specific path. And I'm using different visual cues. And the visual cues are incredibly important for when you're making yours. That way they're pretty easy to, you know, see whenever you're doing this yourself. If you're crazy enough to even do that, I really don't recommend it, but if you want to, you can. So we're almost there, and we haven't gotten an encounter. Super good at this point. And we're coming up on Cosmo Canyon, and then we just have a few more steps to go. I think I was really nervous at this point, so I'm going just a little bit slow, but, you know, better safe than sorry. And then here, I just go right 1 pixel, because that worked for me. and go right. And then because the 2 flags are active still, if you get out of your car and then get back in, the game is like still in that really glitched state, and then this prompt pops up, and usually the buggy breaks down at this point. However, the game isn't really registering that because it's prioritizing the fact that Cloud was still trying to go into the desert as well as the Chocobo. So it can't really process more than 2 things at once, so it just kind of ignores it, and you entirely skip Cosmo Canyon, but you don't get to hear the great music. So if you're not asleep already, that about wraps up Cosmo Canyon Skip. This was found roughly a couple months ago, but I got kind of tied up with streaming a bunch of variety games and I didn't really have time to make a video on it, but I'm back grinding the game now and I'm incorporating it into my runs. It's really fucking hard to do, but we are doing them, and you can go catch me on my Twitch channel, which will be right here. I don't know. It's going to be somewhere in the video, wherever it decides to be. And as far as major skips in the FF7 speedrun can go, what do you guys have for theories or ideas of what the next major one could be in the FF7 speedrun? Leave it in the comments below. Also, make sure to subscribe to the video, like it, dislike it, whatever you prefer, again, for the algorithm. And again, thank you so much for watching today's video. If you're not already asleep with an overload of information, I will catch you guys in the next video, and hope you guys have a great night, morning, afternoon, wherever you happen to be. See you later.